So we'll get started. We've got a good number on now, so welcome to you all who have just joined us. As we know, sport and physical activity can build stronger communities by bringing people together. But we also know that not everybody has equal access. Not everybody feels part of that. And if we're brutally honest, perhaps as a sector, we're simply not doing enough to help people overcome the barriers we know they face to benefit from living a really healthy and active life. Those barriers are widespread, from gender to race, income, education, sexuality, age. The list really does go on in terms of the inequalities that people face. Your panelists today, they're going to share their experiences about the communities that they've worked with, the conversations that they've had, and the challenges, importantly, that they've seen firsthand whilst working in communities. They're also going to share the hope and the practical ways that we can all work together to transform the current situation. Now, inequalities have lasted way beyond coronavirus. They've existed for a very long time. But sadly, there is a risk that the gap could get bigger. And we don't want that. You know, there's over 50 odd of you in here now, and we've got more people who will be joining us. And you're here to say, no, we don't want that. No, we're not going to sit back and let that happen. We want to learn, we all want to share, and we want to change this. So I just say to you, thank you, because it's so, so important. We can't be complacent. And whilst there's a real opportunity to decrease the gap, it will be very easy for it to get bigger in a whole lot of ways. And we just as a sector cannot let that happen because we know the difference that physical activity and sport makes to people's lives. So let's get into it. Some fantastic speakers, really, really insightful, and I'm really looking forward to hearing the content for today. First up, we have Ron Tully, who is the head of community development at England Boxing. Now, boxing is a sport renowned for its ability to reach the heart of communities and some of the communities that are facing the greatest hardship. Not only keeping fit, but actually people being supported, learning life skills, providing hope and ways out of situations they didn't think they could get out of. I've also heard this morning, Ron is not far off being a badminton champion. He won't mind me saying that, I'm sure. So Ron, over to you.
Yvonne, thank you very much indeed. The reference to badminton there, for people that know me, I was a bit daunted that Diane Medal was on the same presentation with all her fantastic array of medals, and I just wanted to remind everybody, or if they didn't know, I was the 1978 St Bride's High School, East Kilbride, just south of Glasgow, sixth form badminton runner-up. So I'm obviously an elite athlete myself. That explains that one. The title that I put forward was that boxing, more than simply keeping kids off the street. For all that, I think most of us understand that saying, and the lay person and politicians often talk about boxing in a very good way to say that it keeps kids off the street, but playing Scrabble in your bedroom keeps you off the street. Playing any sport keeps you off the street. Locked in your bedroom because you haven't done your homework keeps you off the street. So we have, and I'll get to it later in the presentation, some brand new research that kind of lifts the lid about what it is boxing clubs do with these kids when they're off the street, which to me is actually far more interesting and important. And as Yvonne mentioned in the intro, we're looking at leveling playing fields and inequalities. The inequality that we're really going to hone into on my presentation is about poverty and low socioeconomic groups. Some stats to share with you, that we have nearly 1,000 clubs across England that are all affiliated to England Boxing. 21,000 registered members, but probably more important than the registered members is the there's something like 120 to 130,000 people attend clubs every single week. Of the clubs that we've got, 40% of our membership, so are in the 20% of highest areas of multiple deprivation, compares with 16% of football clubs that are in the top 20% and 3% of tennis clubs. So the actual location of boxing clubs tells you a great deal. The next slide is for those of you that aren't from a boxing background. I'm an ex-PE teacher and work with sports leaders. I'm not from a boxing background, but I've been delighted to have nearly 9 years with England boxing now. But the boxing we're talking about is the 3-minute round stuff, the stuff that you see at the Olympics every 4 years. It's not the pro sport, but every pro has come through the amateur ranks. For every competitive boxer that goes in the ring, there's about another 7 who attend our clubs that go to be a member of that club and for fitness purposes. About 1/3 of our participants are now female, which, considering 24 years ago females weren't allowed to box, is quite an amazing statistic in itself. And our BAME targets across participation are higher than average. We meet the governance standards for the board and in our staffing. I've often said when we're asked about BAME participation in boxing is most boxing coaches can't tell you the ethnicity of the members of their clubs, but they can tell you how much everybody weighs, because that tends to be more important for them. And of course, boxing's got so many role models from the Black, Asian, minority ethnic groups as well that maybe that helps. We live in an age of insight and data collection, which is obviously very important. Anybody running a business would like to have a really good understanding of the of their insight around their business. But I flagged this slide up because it's something that we're not good at in boxing. Our coaches don't like filling in survey after survey. Some of them don't have the skills to use the IT. Some of them don't simply have the IT. Many of them, when they don't return surveys back to the national governing body, say, well, I was too busy working with the kids and I can't be bothered with your surveys because, you know, what's more important, I fill in your surveys. I suppose what we're trying to work on, and we've been lucky the last 8 years to have a fully funded team of club support officers that try to modernise the whole systems. But where I think we need to work and build in boxing is a lot of the people that run the clubs aren't very good at delegating responsibilities to other people. So whilst I can think of other sports where the head coach will have somebody that looks after all the IT, somebody that looks after grants, somebody that looks after fundraising, quite often boxing clubs are the traditional one-man band, and they're very reticent to let go of the kind of power to run that club. And it's something that we've been working on, because every club would have somebody that could probably do their grant applications and could work on the surveys. However, with the negative aspects of COVID and the horrible pandemic we're going through, we used it to positives, because as a team we decided to ring all 971 clubs and speak to coaches personally. And we took that opportunity. Sorry, my slides just disappeared. We took that opportunity to do a Survey Monkey, and it's the most successful return we've had. So we've had nearly a 50% return out of that, just by personally speaking. So the insight for us is our coaches don't like filling in forms, but they're quite happy to spend 20 minutes on the phone to you when they will give you some honest opinions about what's going on. So a quick reaction to what we've been up to since lockdown and what's been going on in March. First and foremost, we were to signpost, we heard about the business grants that were available depending on your rateable value. That's been a real windfall for many of our clubs. Have received 10,000 and 25,000 checks coming through the post. As a team, some of us have really been helping with those applications because people might not know exactly how to go about it. And we successfully, I say we because it was colleagues of mine that did all of this, it's very little to do with me, but we launched a knockout COVID-19 campaign for Just Giving, and we've had an enormous, over 130,000 pounds worth came in. It's quite delicate to go into poor communities and ask them to just give when people don't have a lot of extra cash going around, but it's actually brought in over 130,000 pounds to a lot of clubs. We've been extremely successful with Sport England's Community Emergency Fund with just over 1.1 million pounds. So with all the various grants that we've been working on, we're now in excess of 4.3 million pounds that we know has been leveraged into clubs since the beginning of lockdown. And that's just a tiny bit more than the whole of the England boxing grant for the last 4 years in this current funding round. Finally, we just signed off contracts, strangely, this morning with Sport England. And I think I'll come back to this later about some of the change in sort of philosophies and strategies of Sport England by way of funding, is that we've been given the responsibility to get £150,000 worth of funding directly to some of the poorest clubs in the country with the Tackling Inequalities Fund. The research that I talked about, again, it's a Sport England grant we received some time ago, and had 60 of our most community-focused clubs from all over England had a 2-day conference in Leicester last October. Sheffield Hallam research department attended that, had nearly 70 hours of transcripts, and came out with research which I know I've sent to Y Sports, and anybody can access that research, or if you can get my email, I'll make sure you can get it all. But there was 4 main headings that came out of the research, and I'll just go into them in slightly more detail than what's on the slide. But the first and probably most important thing about Boxing Club was its location. The clubs are based in areas of deprivation, so one reason why people can't afford to go to sport is because if they're having to travel there, and the cost of travel, well, that's negated because we're in those poorest communities. The coaches tend to come from the same community as their members, so the coaches don't fly in from the leafy suburbs. So there's a great amount of trust within the community because everybody knows one another. Clubs are very adaptable, so the location where they're in, there's very few purpose-built boxing clubs. They're usually in old youth clubs and school centres and manufacturing outlets on the outskirts of towns, because they're the cheapest place to have your club. And because of that, they're very adaptable. And lots of local people will help their boxing club. Electricians, plumbers, joiners, etc. will put some money in to make sure the boxing club can still run. But our biggest problem there is the security of tenure. Boxing clubs don't tend to own their premises, they rent them. And unless they can get a good rental agreement, then it's very difficult to do up that club or have any kind of capital investment into the club. The second main strand that came out of the research was about coaching and leadership, and the friendship and camaraderie between the boxer and their coach. I know every sport will have that, but not every sport demands that you have a coach. I played an awful lot of football. Frequently, we never had a coach. You would just play with your mates. Well, every boxer obviously has a coach. But those coaches tend to go a lot further, maybe because of the relationship they have and in the environment they're working within, that some of them become almost surrogate parents for the kids, the young boxers. There's a lot of work around catharsis of aggression. It's a theory I've not really agreed with, but it's definitely controlled aggression within the boxing environment. And all the great coaches I've spoken to say as soon as a boxer loses their head in the ring and it's not controlled aggression, they'll lose the bout straight away. But probably the most interesting thing was the way that boxing coaches are doing so much way beyond teaching how to jab or throw a punch or even just boxing fitness. And they've started to work on things like mental health. Quite a lot of boxing clubs open 7 days a week now, doing apprenticeships with young people. Loads of boxing clubs during COVID have had delivering food to their local communities. And it really kind of shows that boxing clubs can become the heart of the community. Around the mental health issue, England Boxing has devised its own Boxing Mind course, a 3-hour workshop that we wrote with the charity Mind. Culture and ethos, again, if you know about boxing, it's a worldwide sport, rules that are very understood, proud of its multicultural background, a very no-nonsense standard, which probably impacts on the discipline, and a real loyalty to the club, and an ethic that if you're prepared to come in and work hard, it doesn't matter if you go on to be a Nicola Adams or an Anthony Joshua superstar. If you're a hard worker, you're welcome and you can come and join the club. The last thing's probably the most relevant insofar as today's theme for the conference about levelling playing fields, because the funding and impacts on clubs is amazing, and boxing does very well in the grants that it can achieve. But often those funding grants come with a whole load of strings attached, and some of the clubs aren't so good at measuring all of that. We'll come back to that a little bit later. But just to give you one little anecdotal story, I took a couple of coaches and a senior member of Merseyside Police to London, to the London offices of the Mayor of London, to discuss some fantastic knife crime projects that had been doing in a very tough part of the city of Liverpool. And all the civil servants want to know, give me the statistics of how many less stabbings there have been in Liverpool because of your project. And of course, that's unbelievably difficult to assess. But what they were doing is they'd taken a very hard-hitting workshop into every single school in Liverpool, but yet the way that London wanted to copy it had to have the success factors of what's the less amount of knife crime, which at this stage it just couldn't be proven. So I think the present, or hopefully what's going out of vogue now, is that yes, of course we can help fund you. You're in a poor area. All you need is a club constitution, a management committee, two signatories on your bank account, 2 years audited accounts, KPIs for your project, detailed insight, an M&E strategy, and demonstration of your impact model. And of course, we'll be back and delighted to fund you. How many of you have probably been through that kind of system? So what I'd love to see and work with the politicians and the funders, that what happens if a club hasn't got any of those factors that I've just detailed? Everybody in the community, whether it's the national governing body, local politicians, councillors, police forces, this club is fantastic. But you've got a club that probably doesn't have a management committee or can't be bothered filling in the forms. But you know, there's 70, 80 kids, 4 or 5 nights out a week in a very tough area. Can't we be clever enough to find ways to support those people, even if they don't have the 2 signatories of the club constitutions? Can we move outside of communities, or people from outside communities telling you what's best for you? And if you're as old as me, and because I taught in Liverpool for some years, you might remember at Heseltine coming up and deciding what was good for Liverpool was a garden festival. And it's no longer being run, of course. Could funders and communities really work together on a really cohesive funding strategy? And for me, I'd love to think of the boxing clubs that would be the real hub of communities, not just offering boxing, but offering a whole load of other services that residents from some tough communities won't use because they don't trust the institutions where they come from. And as a little plug as a Glaswegian, to finish here, if you've not read this book and you really want to get an insight about what it's like to grow up in a poor, tough area, then this Darren McGarvey book, I know my team have read it, and it's a fantastic book. And that's me, Chair.
Thank you ever so much, Ron. Really insightful there, and great to hear sort of the latest research. I think research that sports can provide in terms of the impact that it has on people's lives is so powerful. And I did quite a lot of research on England boxing and boxing in general when I was at uni, actually. Not that long ago, not the first time, after that. And there's some very powerful stuff. And sometimes I just wish we can scale more and more for boxing and other sports as well, because it makes such a big difference. I really think it's interesting as well about, you know, the fact that sports clubs in general, and you know, in particular boxing clubs in this instance, have very much sort of taken on like more of a role in the community, like you said, delivering food parcels and things. And it will be interesting to see as we come out of this, you know, how the wider community support the club moving forward, and see if more people can do little bits for the clubs to help them, because it's not easy. And you'll also be pleased to know some really good praise in the chat box, actually, around the support and contribution that England Boxing have made to local clubs and the difference that it's made. And I always think it's really nice to hear that. We always find out about the stuff national governing bodies or organisations don't do. We don't often hear about the amazing stuff that they do. So there's somebody in this that's very happy with you. So well done to you and the team at England Boxing. Just in case anybody's not read the chat that's going on, just to let you know, all the slides from today will be shared. And the webinar is also going to be, well, it's being recorded and it'll be able to play back live for you. So if you're desperately scrambling and making notes, you don't need to worry too much. You can go back to that at another point. Thanks very much for that, Ron. Really, really great. Next up, I've got a good friend of mine, somebody who I've actually seen inspire people, and is going to do an absolutely outstanding job with their next project. It's Adam Farraker. He is the CEO of the HideOut Youth Zone in East Manchester, and he's probably one of the most passionate people I've met when it comes to young people that are facing hardship. A long career I won't go into in terms of youth work and really understanding young people and working and being able to connect with them, and giving them a platform for hope and aspiration. So I'm really excited that Adam's here to be able to tell you about the fantastic work they're doing, which has been significantly affected, as many things have, with the coronavirus, but it's on the brink of opening, and it's going to make a huge difference to people. It's not too far from me, and I can't wait for it to open. So Adam, over to you.
Thanks, Siobhan, for that very kind introduction. It's one of the best introductions I think I've ever had. Very grateful for that. Very grateful to be on the panel with such inspirational colleagues and partners as well. So as Yvonne said, I've worked in youth services now coming up to 20 years across the whole of Manchester. I actually started my career as a young person myself, so I was probably on every kind of targeted list you can imagine and name, in terms of Greater Manchester Police, the local authority, housing providers, etc. As a troubled young person back at that time. And it was actually a pair of street youth workers, what we call detached youth workers, that were in our local area, that managed to engage me and a couple of my peers and change my life for the better through the power of youth work. So that's kind of what I just want to spend a few minutes talking about, how we can engage and support young people in disadvantaged communities and empower them to improve their own life chances, whether that's through sport or through community work, youth work, whatever that is. But it's more the approach and the principles and values of professional youth work that can be embedded in any walk of life, in any profession we're working with particularly with young people. So I'm just going to go through a quick presentation, and then hopefully at the end I can answer any questions people may have. Brilliant. So as Yvonne said, worked in youth services for many years, had many roles throughout Manchester's youth service, which was disestablished back in 2010 because of the budget cuts at the time. More recently, I worked my way into the position of Head of Youth Strategy and Engagement at Manchester City Council before taking on my most recent role now as CEO of HideOut Youth Zone, which is based in Gorton in East Manchester. But I just want to start, if I can, by just giving the Manchester context really. So Manchester has huge aspirations for being in a list of the top world-class cities internationally, and I think we're well on our way to achieving that. We're continuously seen as a city that leads the way in terms of culture, art, research, activism, business, definitely resilience. I always say, if there's one city that was made to come back from pandemics such as COVID-19, it's Manchester. Every kind of crisis that's come our way in the last 20, 30, 40 years, we've managed to come back better and stronger. So I believe Mancunians, and particularly young people, were made for such crisis, and we will come back better and stronger from that. And I'm sure, you know, with inspirational people like Diane on the panel today, everybody knows Manchester definitely as a city of sport. So the city's booming, and the economy has seen substantial growth in the last 10 to 15 years, and it continues to grow day by day. We've got a population of around 580,000 people now, and it continues to grow. But as the economy grows in Manchester, so does the gap between those who benefit the most from that economic growth and those who benefit the least, which are primarily children and young people in disadvantaged communities. So despite the city's success over the past decade or the past 2 decades, we still remain in the top 5 for the most deprived local authorities in the country. And particularly youth services have seen a disproportionately cut budget over the past 10 years. So as I mentioned earlier, in Manchester back in 2010, the city took the decision to disestablish its in-house youth service and move to a grant funding commissioning model, which has seen different successes and different challenges over the last 10 years. But I think it's important to note that back in 2010-11, the budget for youth services in Manchester was around £15 million a year. As it stands today, it's just over 2 million. So it's seen significant cuts, and despite us still being able to engage thousands of young people across the city, the capacity to be able to engage young people on a daily basis and provide high quality services has continued to be a struggle and a challenge over the past 10 years. So the city's population in terms of children and young people, we've actually got, it's nearly a third of the population is under the age of 18. Nearly half, so 46% of children and young people under the age of 18 in Manchester are living in poverty, which I'm sure you'll agree in the year 2020 is ridiculous that children and young people at that level are still facing that kind of disadvantage. And we all know that poverty breeds other social inequalities, whether that's related to education, health, attainment. We've got disproportionate numbers of young people from BME communities facing disproportionate levels of poverty. In the catchment area where HideOut Youth Zone's based, in neighbourhoods such as Longsight, Gorton and Ardwick, the poverty rates are as high as 60%. We've got above the national average numbers of young people who are not in education, employment or training, or at risk of not being in employment, education or training. That's only been heightened with the current situation. As we know, a lot of year 11 pupils over the last few months have not been able to sit the GCSEs. So young people who are progressing through vocational courses, again, have not been able to sit those portfolio qualifications. So we know there's an increased risk of young people becoming NEET or not in education, employment and training from September onwards, and will need additional support. That's only going to increase the inequalities, social inequalities across the city. And this will be the same up and down the country as well, not just in Manchester. We've got 1 in 3 young people struggling with their emotional health and well-being. Higher rates again for BME communities and also for young people who identify as LGBTQ. Again, that's going to increase with the current situation. I think there's a poll, which I'm not sure if that's gone live at the moment during this presentation. The increase, as you can see, of young people who are already being supported by children and adult mental health services that have said that they've reported worse mental health following school closures during the COVID dynamic is 84%, which is ridiculous. And other vulnerabilities that young people are facing in disadvantaged communities are only going to increase during the COVID-19 pandemic. So, on to the next slide. To be honest, I could have had 5, 6, 7 slides highlighting the social inequalities and the disadvantage that young people and the challenges that young people are facing in Manchester. But I don't think that would be fair, because what that doesn't show is how great the young people are. They're articulate, they're passionate, they're intelligent, they've got huge aspirations, and they've got so much potential, if not more potential than some of their peers locally and nationally. But what they don't have is equal opportunity to realise that full potential. And that's where we come in. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what youth work is now for the next couple of minutes. It's a question I often get asked by people who have never worked in a youth work environment or don't fully understand what we do as youth workers. They often think we just play pool or table tennis with groups of young people in youth clubs. And in some cases, that is what we do. But I think the primary aim of whatever activity we engage young people with, whether that is boxing or sport or arts, is to use that particular engagement tool to bring the young people in, engage them in a conversation, to try and build a trusted relationship with them over a longer period of time. Now, the key principles, professional principles and values that underpin youth work include voluntary engagement. So the relationship with young people from a youth work perspective is entirely on their terms. So at any point they can disengage with that relationship with us as a youth worker. And that's how you build a trusting relationship over a sustained period of time. So if you think in a young person's life, even think back to when you was a teenager or a child, if you think about the number of adults that were in your life, how many of them did you actually choose to be in your life? Not many. You don't choose who your mum, your dad is, your carer, your doctor, your teacher. You don't choose that relationship. It's enforced on you. And that's what makes youth work so different and so special in terms of any young professional that's working with children and young people. And it's by starting with those principles and starting with a strength-based approach of young people, starting where they are, working with them because you want to work with them as a young person and they want to work with you, not because they're on a list because of antisocial behaviour or because they're a gang member or because of any other negative connotations. And there's a need to work with young people for those reasons. But I think the power of universal youth work is that you start where young people start. And it's the same if you're looking to develop stronger, resilient communities. The same principles apply to any form of engagement with any community and any individual within that community. But as I said, the primary aim of what we do with young people is to engage them in positive activities that develop them personally and socially so they can go on to lead successful lives in the future. Engaging them in activities that develop their confidence and their self-esteem, which makes them more resilient to negative influences in future life. Empowering young people to make informed decisions and improve their own life chances. So we're not telling them what's right or wrong or holding their hands to tell them what to do, but we give them as much information as possible in a coaching and leadership approach to allow them to make informed decisions about their futures. And that might include making sure that young people understand how they can make a positive contribution in the local community. So whether that's through social action projects that include intergenerational work. We talk about community cohesion, which was a phenomenon that came out around 2001, 2002. after the riots up and down the country and the Ted Cancel report. And you can see over the last 10 years that the language around community cohesion has evolved to focus more on creating the conditions for integration. So whereas community cohesion will be about a community identifying joint goals, really, about how to make that community a positive, strong, resilient environment, and celebrating differences and understanding each other's differences. Creating the conditions for integration is more about celebrating and identifying commonalities and how we bring those communities and individuals from the communities from different backgrounds together. Our primary focus is doing that with young people. If I move on to HideOut Youth Zone specifically, so HideOut Youth Zone is a brand new charity which is based in East Manchester, as Yvonne said earlier, actually located on the border of Longsight and Gorton. We was actually due to open a new £6.5 million facility Saturday just gone, but because of the current crisis, the current pandemic, we've had to postpone that until the end of September due to not being able to progress with recruitment. Also just not being able to progress with the internal fit out of the building. But the facility and the services we'll deliver from the facility are for ages 8 to 19, up to 25 for those with additional needs. So that can be young people with disabilities, but also other vulnerable groups such as young carers, looked after children, care leavers, all those young people who need additional support to move into independent adulthood in the future. And most of the statutory support they get stops at the age of 18 when you're then classed as an adult. So we'll continue to provide those services 7 days a week, 52 weeks of the year. There'll be over 20 positive activities every evening. As you can see in the picture, that's our boxing mixed martial arts gym, which we'll be getting into run about in the future to get us some support from England Boxing. We've actually got 5 amateur boxing clubs within a 2-mile radius of the youth zone. So again, our primary aim is not to try and find the next Nicola Adams, as Ron said earlier, or Tyson Fury. What we're trying to do is create a platform or a pathway for young people who might not have the confidence to walk in a local boxing club, but will come into a youth centre to engage with youth workers. And we can try and challenge them and push them to engage in activities, take themselves out of their comfort zone. And then if they do show a talent or they do show an aspiration, whether that's sport, whether that's art, we can then create that pathway by working in partnership with the local organisations. So if somebody comes in is interested in boxing, shows a talent in boxing, we would then pull in the local amateur boxing clubs, depending on what area of the city that young person lives in, work in partnership with them to create that pathway for them to move on then as an amateur boxer or a professional boxer in the future. We're not trying to do that ourselves. We want as much as possible to be able to work in partnership, not just with the third sector and the sports sector in the city, but with the business sector as well. So we can create employment and training opportunities for young people, trying to aid that social mobility, where young people, particularly from disadvantaged communities, might not have the social networks or the personal networks around them to be able to realise that full potential, as I said earlier, and move into aspirational employment and training opportunities in the future. So at HideOut Youth Zone, that's what we're trying to do. We are the 14th youth zone in the country, so we form part of the Onside network. Onside youth zones have around 9, I think, in the northwest. There's already an existing youth zone in Manchester in Harper Hayes. We joined them in Manchester, and there was 3 that opened last year in London. So you've got Croydon, Barnet and Barking and Dagenham. And yeah, we will continue to work with up and down the country with the youth zones, but with other youth and play providers as well. It means a lot to me, this project, because this is the part of the city that I grew up in as well. So being able to work for nearly 20 years and understand the power of youth work to bring about a positive change in a young person's life, to be able to go full circle and bring such an aspirational project like this back into the heart of the community that's never had anywhere near this kind of investment, not just in young people, but in the community itself, is amazing. And I think the key thing with this particular model is the sustainability of the funding model. So whereas in the past, we've relied on public funds consistently for youth services, and when we've seen disproportionate cuts, that's meant a negative impact on being able to provide services, life-saving services to children and young people. This particular model focuses on a three-way income. So as children and young people themselves, it costs £5 a year to join and 50p a visit, which if you are able to see the facility, and I hope a lot of you will be able to come and see what we do, you'll be blown away by the quality of the facilities we've got and the services we deliver. And you'll see that that's very good value for money. But at the same time, when you consider the makeup of the community where we are located, that can be a lot of money as well, particularly if you've got 5, 6 siblings in a family. That £5 quickly becomes £30 a year, and the 50p a night becomes £3 or £4 a night. So we'll make sure that memberships and visits are subsidised as well, and we can do that through the funding by the local authority, but also the majority of our funding comes from the private sector in Manchester. So it costs about £1.3 million a year to run a youth zone facility, and around £1 million of that is kind of secured through Manchester's private sector. And I think that's a real kind of step change, really, and a change in narrative in terms of funding going forward. And that's something we hope to build on and complement existing youth charities and services in Manchester, and be able to draw down and leverage some of that funding to complement what they're doing as well, whether that's sports organisations or youth provision. Just in terms of the impact on the current situation and lockdown, as I mentioned earlier, all the vulnerabilities and disadvantages that young people are facing in cities like Manchester have only increased. I'm really concerned about young people who might not be on the radar at the moment. So we know the local authority and schools will have a list of vulnerable young people for whatever reason that they've been working with to support before COVID and definitely through COVID. I'm definitely concerned that there will be a whole group of young people now, cohort of young people who might not have been anybody's radar before this, but because of the increased pressure in the home environment, without being able to go out and socialise and meet with their peers, and get that primary safeguarding support from schools, I am concerned that when we come out of this, there's going to be increased tensions on public services and third sector services. And the quicker we can get schools open properly, and the quicker we can get youth services open properly so we can support them in the evenings and the weekends, the better. But we just got to make sure we do that safely as well and appropriately at the right time. But in terms of HideOut Youth Zones, so over the last couple of months, we've adapted our services. As I say, we weren't able to open this weekend, but that doesn't mean we've just got down tools and not done anything. We've been engaging young people online through Zoom and Teams and all these other new tools everybody's using now to make sure that we maintain contact and we can still check in on young people's well-being and health. But we've also been delivering outreach and detached-based street youth work across the city and in the community to make sure that young people in the communities know we're still here, we're engaging with them, know about our offer going forward and how they can come in and support. In terms of the food provision, similar to what Ron said earlier, we've been providing food packages and food provisions for the city's most vulnerable. So we are now part of the Greater Manchester Fair Share and Eat Well Manchester campaign, which you would have seen Marcus Rashford, his high-profile support for that campaign over the last few weeks. So we will directly benefit from some of the funding that's raised, and it means we're able to provide food to some of the most vulnerable people in our community, but also to the frontline NHS staff as well. And philanthropy. So as you can, as a charity, we were deeply concerned about the financial impacts that COVID-19 might have. It's affecting businesses who are our primary funders as well. But as a result, we've seen increased support from those organisations, increased support from the private sector in Manchester, and an increased kind of focus on philanthropy in the city. And I think we need to kind of capture that and make sure that that's sustained. So it's great that there's so much emergency funding available at the moment for COVID-19 response. But I think when we're really going to need that is in a year's time, in 2 years' time, when services go back to their core services, whether that's, again, sports or community groups, whatever services are delivered on the front line. We need to make sure that that support is sustained in the long term. And as much as possible, giving young people a platform to be heard. I'm just conscious of time, but I have got a video which I won't play, but if anybody wants me to share that with them after this presentation, I'll be happy to do so. You tend to find quite a lot of the time adults will speak on behalf of young people, but actually giving young people, empowering them, giving them a platform to speak for themselves and have a voice themselves, that's when you truly get a sense and a feel of what young people are saying about how this current situation is affecting them, what they need, and going forward, how we can empower them to improve their life chances. So I will share that video with anybody that wants it. And then the final slide is, this is something they get asked quite often, or do conversations I have with people in the community or some of our business colleagues, adults who don't necessarily feel that they can support young people or they have something to offer young people. What I'd say is that every single young person is an individual. So every single person has something to offer them. It doesn't matter if you've been doing youth work for 20 years or you've been a sports coach for the last 10 years. It doesn't matter. Every young person is an individual, and every person on this seminar now, on this webinar, can support young people. So think about tomorrow, the next day, in the weeks to come, in the months to come, what can you do to support young people, empower them, and lift up the community going forward? Because you'll be surprised that when you give them an opportunity, how powerful young people can be about finding local solutions and improving the communities themselves for each other and for the wider community going forward. Thank you very much. That's me. I feel like I talked at 100 miles an hour then.
It was brilliant. A lot to fit in, Adam, but really, really interesting stuff, and really powerful. And you know, it's one of those things, isn't it? Like, you were one of those young people, and I think, you know, you talked about the power of young people and the voice, but I must also say to you, the power of you as a young person who have kind of grown up and gone into a career to help other young people is so inspiring. And you can just hear the passion, like, it's there, and it's amazing. And you know, do take Adam up on your offer if you're in the Northwest or you happen to be visiting Manchester, because honestly, the facility will blow your mind. I had the opportunity to go around it pre all of COVID, and it's absolutely incredible. And a charity that I chair will be looking to hopefully do some work in there and support young people through the power of football. So that's very exciting. You touched on something there that Ron has touched on, and I'm sure Diane will pick up on as well, a theme around resilience and strength and grit. And you know, we all need that right now. Young people, old people, us in the middle. You know, we need that. And sport and physical activity is such a powerful tool to be able to give the ability to learn and develop in that way. So obviously, I'm very biased. I love this city of Manchester, and it has incredible spirit. I'm sure other cities in the country that colleagues that are watching will know. But that resilience is so very important. And it will be, because you touched on a really important point, which is that, you know, if lockdown lifts and things go back to whatever a kind of normal is, the impact of this is going to be far-reaching, and it's going to last a long time. It's not just going to be done in 3 or 4 months. So the ways that we all need to innovate, and the ways that we need to capitalise on those opportunities, like you said, the philanthropic sort of giving, and people feeling more compelled to support the community, you know, as a sector, we have to capitalise on that, because it won't last forever, and we're going to need that support for our communities longer. There was 2 polls that went on in that one. The first one, Adam answered in his presentation. Around 84% of young people in Manchester feeling their mental health is worse now that schools are closed and that they can't access the support. Very, very frightening, and it shows how important the work that sports clubs, youth workers, and community groups are doing now is to help young people and to keep in contact and connect in a positive way, because not everybody lives in a situation where their home life is a good life, unfortunately. The other poll was around a survey of a youth parliament and young people aged 11 to 18, and the answer to their number 1 priority, they found there was options of better education, protecting the environment, COVID-19, and ending knife crime. Young people, 50%, were very much focused on protecting the environment. So again, that's something for us all to be mindful of as we move forward. So I'm conscious of time. I don't want to steal Diane's thunder in any way, shape or form. So our panelists have already talked about how inspirational this lady is. I'm very fortunate to know her very well. I know her personal story and the amazing work that she does for her charity, Diane Medal Sport Foundation, which supports young people across Manchester. More recently, she has become the lead for the Young Persons Task Force on behalf of the Greater Manchester Mayor, Andy Burnham. And Diane's going to talk to us about sort of taking the lead and the important role we all have to play in terms of leadership and making sure that we are really standing up to change the inequalities that people face in our communities. So Diane, over to you.
Thank you, Yvonne, and good morning, everybody. Thank you for the opportunity to follow both Ron and Adam, 2 individuals I know well. Love boxing. I'm from a family of boxers. Actually, my brother was a former light heavyweight champion and just missed out on getting to the '84 LA Olympics. And Adam mentioned the work that we have done together and the fact that when he was involved in the city council. He was one of the very first people, actually, along with Sir Howard Bernstein, that I came to with the idea of setting up the Diamond Sports Foundation. I am the CEO, I was starting to say, of the Diamond Sports Foundation, and our work is very much around working with young people who are growing up in areas of disadvantage. We're 10 years old this year. What a year to be 10. But when we set up, it was with one purpose and one purpose only: to take the chance out of success and make it a choice. Before they changed the wards and the way that the wards looked, when we set up 10 years ago, there were 34 wards in Manchester. 29 of them were the most deprived in the UK, and that hasn't changed. Manchester still ranks as one of the most deprived areas for young people to grow up in, and we want to do more of that. On one of the slides that I noticed on Adam's presentation, where he talked about excellence is not a skill, excellence is an attitude. One thing that I would add to that is excellence is opportunity. And that leads me to talk around my sporting career. But before I talk about that, let me just touch on this young person's task force that has been mentioned. So alongside the role of CEO of the DMSF, Andy Burnham, the Greater Manchester Mayor, asked me to lead a task force to develop a young person's guarantee, because there is real fear and worry about the fact that this generation could actually become the lost generation. And what's coming out already is that there is a real understanding that this recession could be 10 times worse than the previous recession, and the people who are going to suffer the most are potentially young people. So this task force will focus on 11 to 30-year-olds and begin to understand what is the most important thing to them right now as we are trying to deal with COVID, but also as we emerge from it. And we've heard from some of the themes already that are coming through. It's jobs, it's apprenticeships, it's education. A lot of people are asking, am I still going to get a college place? Will I be able to go to university? Is there going to be a job there for me? And that statistic that we heard of 80% of young people who are already diagnosed with a mental health condition have told us that that condition has gone worse during COVID-19. 42% of young people who didn't have a medically diagnosed condition have now told us that they are more anxious, they are stressed, they are not sleeping well. So in terms of mental health and some of the themes that are emerging, what we hope the task force will do is identify those needs, those issues, those challenges, and provide some of the solution. Before the fancy title of chairing the youth task force or CEO or non-executive director, where I sit on a number of boards, I was a professional athlete. And I was fortunate enough to compete in 4 Olympic Games and win gold, silver and bronze at the Commonwealth Games. But more than anything, I'm a proud Manc. So when I was growing up in Longside, went to school in Moss Side, it was really an opportunity, without even knowing it, that actually a chance meeting with a volunteer changed my life and continues to change my life. Going to school at what's called Manchester Academy now, it was Ducie High School then, a volunteer who had been invited to come and watch a PE lesson from Sale Harriers was watching that lesson, and at the end of the lesson he said to me, "You've got potential, would you like to join a running club?" So I'm 11 years old, first year in high school, and have no real understanding of what potential means. But not wanting to be embarrassed, I said yes to this stranger, this coach, and that changed my life for the rest of my life. But chance meetings are absolutely never good odds. They've never been good odds. So in order for us to level the playing field, or begin to start to level the playing field, we've got to take that chance out of success and make it a choice. And I can say that, having competed for 18 years at the very top level, leveling or attempting to try and level that playing field is not going to be easy. We are going to be up against an ever-moving barrier, but it doesn't mean that we shouldn't try. So over the next 5 or 6 minutes or so, what I'd like to share with you is what I have learned in terms of how we can narrow the gap in providing opportunities for young people, how we can narrow the gap in being able to upskill, build confidence, and provide a platform on which young people's aspirations can thrive. The other day, I was reading the Daily Mail. Now, let me tell you, I do read other newspapers, but this article in the Mail jumped out at me. It had the headline of, is sport playing lip service, or is it part of a real charge forward in terms of the change and how we change the landscape in terms of opportunity for young people? And the article went on to say that in 2016, at the last Olympic Games, not one of the 13 swimming, 20 cycling, 6 canoe medalists were from a Black ethnic minority background. Just one of the 26 rowers was. Now, this is important because these are the very disciplines, the very events into which UK sport is pouring millions of money, taxpayers' money. The same UK sport that I suspect, like most of us, is struggling to have a diverse board that therefore gives diverse access and opportunity to the young people that we are trying to reach, back and support. So the important thing and the learning for me, having read that article, was until we are seen as leaders, I think that opportunity to narrow the gap will always exist. So what do I mean by that? BAME players, sports players, are often seen as quick, as athletic, and potentially, therefore, less intelligent than its white counterpart. So when you take that from the sports field into the boardroom, if you are already seen as athletic, you're not necessarily seen as a leader. So we need to be able to provide those opportunities to shift the narrative, to change that unconscious bias that means you can run fast, you can throw far, you can kick a ball with the best skill in the world, but actually we don't see you as a manager. We don't see you as a frontline coach, or we don't see you as a key, influential power decision maker. And we've got to change that. So in preparation for this conversation, I put together my top 8 go-to tips for effective leadership. If some of you are wondering why I went for 8, well, I was an 800-meter specialist, 2 laps, half a mile, and I was trying to think of something quirky that worked. So you can be happy I wasn't a 10,000-meter runner. So here's my top 8 go-to tips for effective leadership in terms of narrowing that gap. These are simple things that we can do, but they are not easy. Number 1, vision. People who win get what they want because they know what they want. So if we are saying we want to have more diverse leadership, we want to change the landscape, we want to bring on board more knowledge and experience, then we have to actually put that out there straight away and ensure that it's clear that's exactly what we want. It's simple, but it's not easy. Number 2, strategy. What's the strategy? In order for us to get more people into leadership positions, to narrow the gap, to level the playing field, we have to have a clear thought of strategy. What's our strategy? It's one thing saying we want to be a more diverse board. We want to have more coaches and managers on the field of play. But how is that going to happen? What's the strategy? Number 3, passion. Let's get excited about what we're doing. Do you ever go into work? When we used to go into work, it's different now, isn't it? And be excited to see your colleagues, excited to see your mates, go into your Monday morning meeting and share what you did at the weekend. If we are going to be successful, we've got to remember that it's passion that will drive this momentum forward. Get excited about what we're trying to do here. There is a real nervousness, I think, when it comes to gender, to colour, to sexual orientation. There's quite rightly a nervousness around it because we don't want to get it wrong, but at the same time we don't want to quell our passion to try and get it right. Number 4, truth. There is no room for denial or fiction. We've got to get comfortable with being self-critical. Sure, we've got to stay realistic, but we've got to, at the same time, try and not be defensive about what we're hearing. As a former athlete, let me tell you, we take criticism 100% all the time. We lose more races than we win. I trained when I was at my best. I probably did 120 kilometers a week of mileage. But part of that meant I was training on the running track as well. And for the majority of time, my coach with his stopwatch in his hand was saying, "That's not good enough, Di. It's not fast enough, Di. I need you to hit the target." And you couldn't be a shrinking violet in that position. I had to take on that criticism and find value in the information that I was getting. You can hear that scratching. That's the dog. Apologies. Go on. So tell the truth. Let's acknowledge what's going on and be comfortable with hearing and telling the truth. Number 5, flexibility. Life is not a success-only journey. If I stand in front of our young people who we work with, whether that's within the foundation or as part of my new role within the task force, and tell them that they can become a great Olympian or they can become Prime Minister, that's the truth. But part of that truth also has to be, how are we going to get there? Let's map out a plan, a flexible plan that's going to help us to get there. So Adam talked about some of those real tangible inequalities that are barriers to young people being able to achieve becoming their best. So we've got to be flexible and understanding in terms of what that map, what that plan looks like for our young people, and also let them know that it's not a straight road. It's not going to be a straight line, but also that resilience has to kick in, and we have to be a strong platform for those young people to be a safety net for them when it isn't a straight line. We've got to bend, but we must never break. We've got to be the mouthpiece and the platform for our young people of strength, particularly now more than ever. Number 6 is about risk. I see this opportunity that we've got right now as a real stepping stone, if you like, for us to change the narrative and change the landscape. But it's also a real moment of risk. And the risk for me is, if we don't use that platform to have more conversations like this, to be brave, to talk about what we think we can do better. And all of us have to have that conversation. We set safe goals because it's safe. And this is a platform right now to take a risk in saying, we recognise, we acknowledge that there's a real challenge to level that playing field, but there are some risks. Some people are going to get dropped along the way. Some people are going to feel a bit isolated and alienated. But if we work together, we can take a calculated risk and mitigate that, because the rewards far outweigh the risks, in my opinion. Number 7 is what I describe as the nucleus, the heart of any organisation. In other words, the values. What do we stand for? In DMSF, the Diamond Dal Sports Foundation, we talk about creating opportunities, acting with integrity, and instilling resilience in all. In other words, for us as an organisation, we have got to surround ourselves with winners, or with people who want our organisation to win. When I'm talking to my team and to the young people that we support, I always say to them, you've got to see a Diane Madal in your team. And I don't mean me. I'm reflecting on, you've got to see an individual with your values who back you and who want you to win in your team. If you're looking to the left of you and you see a naysayer, and you're looking to the right of you and you see a blocker, then we might have some challenge in terms of moving forward. So surround yourself with people who want you to win. Number 8, and this is the last one before I wrap up, action. And there's very little to say on this, because I think Nike summed it up really well. Just do it. Move from strategy to execution. We can have our plan on a page, we can have our headlines, we can have our Monday morning meetings, but at some point we've got to execute. You are at some point going to hear those words, on your marks, and then we're going to have to step up and execute the plan. So in the last academic year alone, DMSF have delivered over 30,000 sessions across 14 schools, primary and secondary, including pupil referral units. We work within the community, so we have hub clubs across North, South, Central and East Manchester. And what we say to our young people is, if you work hard, if you are committed, if you act with integrity, so do an honest, hard day's work, if you are resilient and don't give up at any stage of the process, you will win. You will become a champion, whether that is within the Olympic Games or the sporting arena, or whether it's just to get to school on time, with your pen, with your rucksack, with whatever equipment you need, you will win. And that is the attitude that I'm taking into what I'm experiencing now in terms of the challenges of COVID-19, and the attitude that I will take into September when we get back to the new normal. And it's the same attitude that I believe we should be taking with us to level the playing field. And hopefully those top 8 tips will resonate with you. And if you want to understand more about the work that we do within the foundation, please do have a look at our website, our social media. Yvonne's got my email address. Give me a shout out. Let's talk about how we can together use this opportunity to level the playing field on a strategic level. Thank you.
I feel like giving you a standing ovation, but I'm sat down and I'm not getting up because everything's going to fall off. But oh my gosh, Diane, honestly, you started off with you've got potential. And the fact that that person at that time saw that in you and you didn't even know what it meant, look where it took you. And don't get me wrong, there's a serious mindset in there. We were talking about it before the webinar went live, and you know, a dedication and an absolute focus to achieve your goals. But it just starts with that you've got potential. And both you and Adam have spoke beautifully about how that conversation impacted your life. And for me, and the chat that's been going on as you've been talking, you know, that makes all the difference. And that's the power that we have working in this wonderful sector to make a difference and really genuinely change the lives of people who didn't think that they had potential, didn't even know what it was. Just incredible. Some amazing challenges to shift that narrative, to face the unconscious bias, to have the difficult conversations in order to move this agenda on, not just a little bit, light years, whether it's about gender, whether it's about race, sexuality, there are issues everywhere. And, you know, I sometimes talk to my children and my daughter that you're not going to do that. You're not going to have that situation in your life like I did. If you do, then I've failed as a mom and somebody that works in this sector. And she doesn't quite understand it, but I feel really, really passionate about that inequality. So it was just amazing. I loved it. Your passion absolutely shone through, and the 8 top tips are fantastic. You know, we can take them into lots and lots of different situations. And I really like your point around the nervousness. I think at the moment, with everything that's been in the public domain around Black Lives Matters, people are nervous not to say the right thing, not to offend. But we have to listen, we have to understand, we have to have those conversations, and absolutely we have to use the platforms that we've got to make a positive difference and change. So I am supercharged and ready to go on the back of our 3 presenters today, and I hope that everybody that's tuned in is as well. We will share the contact details for our fantastic speakers, because I know loads of you want to get in touch and have those conversations. So I'm very conscious of time. I know, Diane, you have 12:15 you have to go. We've still got a number of people on the webinar, so maybe take a couple of questions. Before I do, I just want to alert people to the fact that if you click on the offers section in the tabs near your chat function, there is a link to our next webinar, which is a fantastic webinar about reimagining higher education and really looking. When Diane talks about the values and what it means, really looking at how the class of '92 have taken life skills, behaviours, characteristics, traits into education, and actually are teaching that alongside degree material, because they're the kind of skills that we need in life: how to communicate, how to look somebody in the eye, how to live with integrity. These things don't just happen, but we can all develop in those things. So it's going to be brilliant, and that's on the 10th of July. So I'm going to go to some questions. Diane, I just want to say a massive thank you. I know you'll have to jump off. But yeah, thank you for everything, and we'll absolutely be continuing this conversation with Wise Sports.
Thank you. See you later.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks, everybody.
Take care.
Thanks.
Okay, so a couple of questions. There's loads, and I apologise, I'm not going to be able to get to them all. But what I will try and do is pull out some of the ones I think will be the most relevant. I suppose here's a good question. Adam, you talked about the fact that actually there's been a greater level of investment into the facility and the work that you're doing, because people are seeing the real need in the community. But more generally, I don't know, Ron, whether you're more or less optimistic about the level of funding that's going to be sort of coming through to support community sport, given the real challenges that we're facing, certainly at a local authority level, but nationally as well, in terms of investment having to be redirected to support the pandemic. Do you have a view? Are you more or less optimistic?
I think there's going to be lots of short-term fundings because of the crisis. But I was on a youth sport and school sport webinar only last week, and I think it would be a real problem for us just to say, right, let's have a few million now to get through the crisis, because we know we're heading for tough economic times. But the health of the nation, obesity crisis, etc. I've been campaigning around school sport and physical education since I graduated in 1982, and it doesn't need a short sticking plaster. It needs a real long-term investment. And you know, I'm come from a teaching background. My wife's a teacher. I've got 2 kids that are teachers, and of course, numeracy and literacy is massively important. I think if you ask parents around the country, you know, I'd rather have my child as a healthy, socially acceptable young person then people might start to invest a wee bit more in a PE school sport, and then the community club infrastructure, youth services that Adam talked about being decimated all around the country. That I think we might be building up some real problems unless there's some serious long-term investment.
That's a really fair point, actually. It's something we've all long argued for forever, and it's difficult, isn't it, because of funding cycles and spending reviews and that type of thing. But that's how we get the systemic change that's needed to support our communities. And I suppose that's where there are opportunities around devolution as well, and where you know, areas such as Greater Manchester have devolved authorities. There is greater autonomy on how and at what level and for how long. There are still restraints, clearly, but there may be some opportunities in that. There was also a few questions in the chat box around kind of evidence and the body of evidence, whether panelists feel that the body of evidence is strong enough to make the case for more investment or be able to policymakers around the impact. And I suppose that falls in two aspects, really. One around just sport and the other thing that sports delivers other than elite performers, because that's quite niche. And then broader than that, Adam, looking at sort of youth work, it feels like there were loads of youth workers, then everybody was sort of stripped out, and then it's sort of coming back into. What's your view on, you know, is youth work kind of a done deal in terms of people get it and they see the difference and they value it, or has it been something you've felt over the years as maybe been less valued because it's not been understood, and therefore reductions in investments that you spoke of earlier?
Yeah, definitely. I think there's an issue with youth work not being understood, but also the need for, from a funding perspective or a government perspective, to be seen to be delivering youth work for specific outputs or for specific outcomes. And that comes back to what I was saying in the presentation around starting where young people start. So if youth work's delivered in a meaningful way that's going to bring about real change over a long period of time, you have to start where young people start. You can't be working with young people for a particular reason with a particular output or outcome in mind. That relationship has to be led by the young person. And like Diane said, it's not a straight road. You can go, it may go in many different directions. You might have an aim of why you're developing the relationship with that young person. And through the relationship you've got, identify some common goals and milestones to be able to support that young person through. But that's the challenge, is balancing between trying to capture the evidence of the impact of youth work in a positive way versus doing that too much, and then there's an expectation that funding will only come for specific targeted projects. So I saw in the chat someone asked me what I meant by universal services. By universal services in relation to youth work, I mean purely delivering activities or services to young people on an open access voluntary basis. So we're not working with them to deliver a 12-month program on knife crime. We might do that, but the values and principles that we would engage young people with, because that young person wants to come and work with us, not because we've been given a list and loads of personal information about that young person by the police or the local authority and asked to work with them. And that's the challenge we've got, is that there are a lot of organisations nationally, regionally, locally that are quite happy to do that. And I'm not saying that's wrong. I'm just saying because there's not a professional body for youth work, there's no statutory duty to deliver a minimum requirement of youth services. And without that, that's the problem we will have until we've got a statutory duty on local authorities to provide a minimum level of youth services and a clear professional framework and understanding of what professional youth work is. We're not going to have that, because anybody working with people can call themselves a youth worker at the moment. And that's not to say that's not good or that work's any less important, but I think we need some sort of framework that we're working towards. So yeah, balancing between evidence of outcomes and outputs versus actually doing that for the sake of the young people. So I would aim more towards capturing qualitative evidence rather than quantitative. So we're looking at outcomes led by the young people, giving them a voice to tell their story about why they come back to youth provision day to day, rather than chasing numbers and writing reports to send back to funders. Don't tell my board and my chair that I've said that. But we have to find a way of capturing the power of youth work and the impact, so that we're not being we're not chasing the numbers.
Yeah, listen, I think everyone can relate to that, because when you're on the ground, you know when you walk into a boxing club, Ron, you know, don't you, the difference?
Absolutely. It's one of the things we really, I tried to get it in the presentation, but ran out of time. But the outcome of the research in itself is that we're now working with UK Coaching and SIMSPA to create learning. It might not be a qualification, but the research was really a celebration about those clubs that have really been community focused and do a hell of a lot more than just boxing. And we're taking that from a 60 originally that were in the research to a further 240 clubs. But once we're turning it into the training, the kind of ideas that we've discussed is that we want a kind of hybrid sports qualification learning, that a lot of sporty people need the type of skills that you've obviously got, Adam, and want to get those softer youth work skills and don't feel very skilled in it. But likewise, I moved from a PE teacher to a youth worker in a sport development role. And there's a lot of youth workers don't feel comfortable in the sporting environment. But what we're going to try and achieve is something that marries those two. I would love to think that boxing clubs had resident youth workers in them. It would be fabulous, but not just boxing clubs, loads of sports clubs. And the marriage between the harder technical skills that sport offers could be linked with the softer skills that are so much needed for young people now.
I think it's a really fair point.